So in this video tutorial, I'm going to go over the folders inside of the Spot 2.0 software. And the primary objective here is to give an idea of where to look for different files when you're starting a new experiment. So inside of the Spot folder, we have our examples, our low-level files, our PhaseSpace server, our projects, our useful code, and some user manual stuff. So the only important ones for this particular video are the low-level files and the PhaseSpace server. The rest are pretty self-explanatory, but just to be consistent and thorough. Feature list is just some brief notes on things that should be added in the future. The changelog keeps track of everything that's changed through the different versions. Bug list are a couple of bugs that exist right now in the software. User manual is just the user manual, which you can find here if you open up the PDF. And useful code has some examples. I believe I've gone over some of these before. Projects is empty right now, but this is generally where people will put their projects when making an experiment. And then examples are the basic examples. So I'm going to have a separate video on making each one of these examples, but for now we're just going to focus on low-level files and the PhaseSpace server. So first off, in the low-level files folder, we have draw rectangle. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a function that draws a rectangle. This is used for the GUI to draw the spacecrafts. Then we have the experiment source code. So here, this is the basic source code to run any experiment. So we have a file that combines the data when you read it from the Raspberry Pi. We have the GUI files, and we have the libraries for the PhaseSpace, the model parameters, the initializer, the PhaseSpace data streaming executable, the template Simulink diagram, and the thruster parameters. So every time that you create a new experiment, as I showed in the first video tutorial, it essentially is copying the contents of this folder and placing them inside a new folder with the name you give it. After that, we have the generate new experiment folder. So I went over this in the previous video. This is the function that lets you create a new experiment. So when you run this, you give it a name and it will copy the contents that I just explained in the experiment source code and create a new experiment. And then lastly, in this folder, we have the custom library for Spot. So there's a couple of interesting functions that have already been developed. So I'll go into detail in another video on how to develop a custom driver block. But for now, we'll start with the easy stuff. So in the resources block, we have a debugger. This essentially lets you output whatever you want from a Simulink diagram to the command prompt when you run it on the Raspberry Pi. Then we have the PhaseSpace cameras. So the PhaseSpace camera block essentially is called stream data red blue, and this is a UDP receive block written in C code that receives data sent from the PhaseSpace server. The actual code for this block is located in the source code here. So this is the UDP receive block, and then we also have our header file located here. Then we have the GPIO functionalities. So in the GPIO library, we have the pucks on off block. Pucks on off is essentially just a 1 or a 0, 1 for float, 0 for off, and this basically lets you float the platform. Then we have the Dynamixel actuators. Right now this is the biggest library, so this is for the Dynamixel MX28 and MX64 actuators. Right now there is no real differentiation between the two types of actuators, but generally the code works the same for both. So for example, we have in our source directory here all of the C code required to run this. The primary one of importance, which I'll go over in another video, is Dynamixel functions. So this contains every function used for the actuators, including the initialization, whatever move blocks, read blocks, everything goes in here. So if we look at our prototyping Simulink diagram, we will see all of the different blocks in here which are tested, and so these are stored in the custom library. So the custom library itself is located in the main library folder, which we can open with main library, and we just maximize this and unlock it. So each one of these contains the files that I just went over. So PhaseSpace has the streaming block, Dynamixel has all of the different initialization and command blocks. GPIO functionality has the pucks, and the auxiliary functions is to have the identification platform block. So this indicates what platform this simulating diagram is being run on, and then the debugging block. And that basically covers everything in the Spot custom library. In terms of adding a new block to the custom library, I'll go over that in a separate video. And that pretty much covers the low-level files. So now we can take a look at the PhaseSpace server folder. So within the PhaseSpace server, you can pretty much ignore these three since they're generated after you run the after you build it. In order to actually properly open the solution for this, you need to be running Visual Studio's 2017 community, which you can download for free. So if I open up the Stream Data solution, and I open up the C code here. So this is the C code to connect to the PhaseSpace and read data. So I'm not going to really go over the code in detail. I'll do that in a separate video. But generally the way this works is we initialize our communication socket, and then we start collecting data. So we get a handshake, and then we get data, and then we send that data via UDP block, I believe right here. So in order to build this, you would just go build solution, and then you can close this, and under the debug folder, no, x64 release, here's the actual executable. And that pretty much covers the general folder structure for the basic Spot software. So in the next video, I'm going to go into detail on the way that the code works for the PhaseSpace server.